So your reaction to David Noriega's reporting and how widely her views are shared in Israeli society, and I guess more broadly, your take on the toll this war has had on the people of Israel?
It had a devastating impact, particularly immediately after October 7th, and it was a brutal attack and the largest number of Israelis killed since the birth of Israel. But the question and what she framed and what David talked about is what happens now. And there was a sort of sense that there was going to be a military solution. There was going to be this effort to just take over Gaza completely, as we talked about earlier, maybe even, ship Palestinians en masse out of Gaza. It's not clear that's going to happen. The immediate question is sort of, will Hamas disarm? How serious is President Trump's plan to have some sort of international force come in? But it's a sort of fork in the road in terms of more military force or actually trying some sort of transition, some sort of diplomacy here. And I think most Israelis completely disagree with her. They see themselves as the victim, and David was clear that she is the far minority. But I think the shift you've seen, the European governments that have recognized a Palestinian state, even though one doesn't exist, and there's a concern in the U.S. that there's a whole younger generation of Americans that this conflict has changed their view of Israel. So it is a fork in the road for Israelis. It'll take time for them to make this decision, but it's a pivotal moment in Israel's history.
I was going to add just to that point, it's important to keep in mind that Israelis now are seeing themselves more isolated internationally than any time before over the last 70 years. I mean, this is a country that has dealt with a lot of international pressure, but no doubt America and Israel are extremely isolated. I mean, the prime minister of Israel is an indicted war criminal. There are people who are calling for sanctions in the European Union against Israel. Israel is being culturally and academically boycotted from a lot of institutions around the world. More countries are recognizing a Palestinian state. I think at some point you're going to wonder whether or not that translates into an internal political pressure against those who advocated for this war, who supported it, who demanded it to continue, because it does have widespread support. There are people in Israel that want even the government to go further in forcing the Palestinians out of Gaza and annexing the West Bank. So it'll be interesting to see what happens now, just not only from an internal political pressure on the prime minister and within Israeli society, but how the international community also reacts in the moment. Are they going to allow international institutions like the ICC and the ICJ, which the United States has sanctioned? It's going to be interesting to see whether the United Nations is able to uphold the recognition of a Palestinian state despite the pressure that it is facing from this Trump administration. All of the things that the U.S. has done over the last couple of years to protect and shield Israel has caused America and Israel to be further isolated from the world on this particular issue.
I think there's the question of accountability, right, which is kind of what we saw in the piece. What happens if there's no accountability? This makes me think of Spain or Chile, countries that have sort of transitioned from civil wars. And at the heart of that transition sometimes is this effort of truth and reconciliation, right? And that sort of forces communities and societies to confront the darkness and confront the truth and confront that accountability. And so when I was watching this, my question was, what happens now if Israelis do not confront, or in Gaza, they don't confront the reality? Like, what do you see as the danger in that, and not really looking at the past 2 years and understanding what happened in its entirety?
I think the danger is Hamas right now in the immediate, this situation, the next few weeks. Will Hamas disarm? We talked earlier, I'm a former captive, I'm biased, but they have intentionally killed civilians. They kidnapped 250 people from a dozen different nations. It was the largest mass kidnapping, ever seen. There's been state actors, Russia and China, others taking people prisoner, but these kind of tactics are not acceptable, nor is the killing of civilians, by Israeli forces. But the real spoiler here is what happens in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Hamas has weapons, they have fighters, and there should be this creation of an international force, many of them from Muslim countries. Will Arab leaders come in as also and get Hamas to disarm, to somehow, not derail this process at this point? There's definitely issues to be dealt with in terms of Israel's conduct of the war, what the United States has done. But the key player in the next few days is Hamas, and do they actually release all 20 of these living hostages.
I was going to say really quickly, do you think Israel would allow for democratic elections to take place in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza? Because I think that's the problem, right? I think, like, let's be honest about what the situation is. You want to get Hamas out of power, you want to get the Palestinian Authority out of power, you got to have elections. Israel has not allowed elections to take place in the occupied Palestinian territories because they don't want elections to take place in East Jerusalem because Israel considers East Jerusalem as their capital. So the gridlock also comes down to when there is political pressure. And Hamas has had agreements with the Palestinian Authority. They've signed several agreements saying, if we can have elections, we will relinquish power to whoever wins. And every time that comes to the table, it's the Israelis who say you cannot have democratic elections in East Jerusalem or the occupied territories. So how do you solve that if the Israelis have a veto over the Palestinian democratic process?
And it's easy for me as an American journalist, all of us sitting here in New York. The more democracy, the better. I mean,
Right.
If there could be Palestinian elections, a new generation of Palestinian and new leaders coming out, new Israeli leaders, frankly, someday new American leaders, that's the easy answer. And I think you can't give up on that.
Yeah.
There are Palestinians. There was who've talked about some sort of new interim, governing body in Gaza, and it's just it's believing that that's possible, and the question is whether Netanyahu will allow it. And I understand why Israelis will be very
He hasn't
fearful
allowed
of
it
that.
yet, so I don't
Yes.
think he's going to suddenly
And
wake up tomorrow and say it's time for elections.
And
Yeah.
look, the thank you on the sign behind David. President Trump has tremendous political capital at this moment, and he has a chance to sort of make history and keep pressuring Netanyahu to give this process a chance, and pushing the Arab countries to get Hamas to disarm. So we will see what happens.
Just to add really quickly to that point, one of the demands that the Hamas had requested in this prisoner release for the detainees was the release of Marwan Barghouti, who is widely considered as the most popular Palestinian figure,
Right.
a person that could unite the Palestinians, a person who has openly said he believes in a two-state solution and wants to work towards that goal. They have demanded his release. Some Americans have demanded his release. Israel is the only one that has said he will not be released in this prisoner swap. So again, whenever there's a chance for a forward movement, the Israelis will find a way to kind of sabotage it or put a wrench in it, and now they don't have that kind of unifying political leader that Palestinians want.